On today's episode, we're going to look at one of the biggest threats to your retirement, and that's taxes. Now, taxes is a massive topic, and so we're actually going to kind of narrow down and look specifically at where could you move, what state could you move to that has some of the most efficient tax structures for retirees. But before we dive in, this is Retirement Made Simple. I'm your host, Kevin Lum. I'm a certified financial planner, and this channel is dedicated to helping 1 million people retire without worry. Now, we're specifically going to look at state taxes, but there are a number of things that you want to evaluate when you're thinking about moving to a new state and you're thinking about the tax impact that it might have on your retirement plan. The first thing you want to look at is, does the state have a state income tax? Now, just because they have a state income tax doesn't mean you should cross it off your list immediately, because chances are you'll have less income in retirement than in other periods of your life. So if it has a state income tax, then the next question you want to ask is, does the state tax Social Security benefits? Does the state tax traditional pension benefits? And then finally, does the state tax retirement distributions? Because some states will have a state income tax, but they won't tax Social Security or pensions or retirement distributions. The other thing you want to think about, and one of the things that I think often gets overlooked, is the state property tax. People think, well, the state doesn't have a state income tax. But let me tell you, every state wants to generate revenue somehow. And so if they don't have a state income tax, Texas, for example, that means they may have a higher property tax. And a high property tax could potentially hit retirees harder than other people, because that property tax can go up along with property values, whereas your income is not keeping pace. Whereas somebody else who's still working, their income is going to adjust upwards. So just something to think about. Couple other things you want to consider is, does the state have a state estate tax on top of the federal estate tax? And then also, does the state tax dividends and income that you would receive maybe from your investment portfolio? So now we're going to switch over, and I'm just going to go through a quick slideshow, and I'm going to look at the top 11 states that have the most tax efficient structures for people thinking about retiring. So if you're thinking about moving, out of your current state, maybe you live in California or you live in New York State, and you're like, I've got to go someplace cheaper in retirement, these are 11 states that you might want to consider. Okay, so now we switched over. You should be able to see my screen. The first state we're going to look at is Alabama. We are not looking at these states in the order of tax efficiency. We are simply going in alphabetical order. So Alabama is not particularly the best state to retire to for taxes, but simply comes first in the alphabet. Alabama has a number of really positive things when it comes to taxes. There's no tax on Social Security. There's no tax in traditional pension. The state has low property tax. On average, property tax in Alabama is about $600 a year, which might be the lowest of any of the states that I looked at. And there's a low sales tax, which is good. But the problem is that Alabama actually still taxes food, which is kind of unusual. Some of the cons, it has a state capital gains tax. There's local municipalities may have higher taxes. So for example, if you live in Birmingham, their sales tax is 10%. So if you're paying 10% sales tax on your food, that can get expensive. And then in addition, state of Alabama also has a state income tax, depending on how much income you have, of 2 to 5%. So that means if you are working part-time and living in Alabama, you wouldn't pay any income tax on, say, your pension payment or your Social Security, but you would pay income tax on, the job you have, the other job that you have. So that's the first state. So the second state we're going to look at is Alaska. Alaska has a lot to like when it comes to taxes, not so much when it comes to the weather. So they have to do whatever they can to incentivize retirees to move there. So the pros for Alaska is no tax on Social Security income, no tax on your traditional pension, no state sales tax, no state income tax. The one kind of downside to Alaska, besides the fact that it gets frigid in the winter and there's no light for weeks on end, is the state property tax is fairly high. And when you're retired, you want to pay attention to property tax, because a lot of the other taxes are going to be based upon your income or how much revenue is coming into you. So if you have more revenue, more taxes. But if you have more revenue, then maybe you can handle the higher tax. Problem with the property tax is, if you bought a home years ago and the value is increased on that, even though you don't have any additional revenue coming in, you could be paying a significant amount of money in state property tax. So the one mark on Alaska, besides the weather, is the state property tax. Next is Florida. Now, Florida is the haven for retirees. I think there might now be a state law that you can't live there if you're not retired. It's essentially one giant 55 and plus community. My entire family lives there. My mom lives there. My grandparents live there. Everyone I know seems is moving to Florida. No tax on Social Security, no tax on traditional pension, no tax on your income. So these are one of the reasons that Florida is so popular right now, is just because the taxes are very low. But there are a couple issues with Florida. There's a state sales tax. It's not crazy high. It's 6%. And then there's also a state property tax that is, it's not the highest in the country, but it's also not the lowest. So you want to pay attention to that. The next state, this actually state is fairly surprising because it is not known for being tax efficient, but Illinois has a number of benefits for retirees. There's no tax on Social Security, no tax on traditional pension, and there's also no income tax on retirement distributions. So, if you're taking money out of your 401k or out of your IRA, you have to pay federal tax on that distribution, but you don't have to pay state income tax. Now, here come the cons. Illinois has a high state sales tax, and food is, I say high, it's mid-range, but food is taxed in Illinois. There's a high property tax. The average property tax in Illinois is $4,500. And then there's also an estate tax. So if you pass and you leave a significant amount of wealth to your heirs, if it's over 4 million, your heirs are going to get taxed on that. And that's going to be in addition to the federal estate tax. So if you're over the threshold for the federal estate tax, you're also going to be charged by the state. Do I have anything else? What's going on there? Okay, the next state is Mississippi. I love Mississippi because it was the first major word I learned to spell when I was 5 years old. Mississippi. Very proud of myself as a 5-year-old. Okay, pros in Mississippi: no tax on Social Security, no tax on pensions, no income tax on retirement distributions, and there's also a very low property tax of $1,000 on average. Some of the cons to Mississippi is there's a state sales tax that's fairly high, 7%, and there's also a tax on food. I think a tax on food is one of the most regressive taxes that you can have because it hits the lowest wage earners the hardest, but that's not the point of this episode. The next state is another one that's popular with retirees. That's Nevada, because the weather's nice 9 months out of the year. But in addition to good weather, they also have a really tax efficient state for retirees. So no tax on Social Security, no tax on pensions, no state income tax. So retirement distributions also will not be taxed. The cons: state sales tax, a little on the high end, 6.85%, and state property tax is a little bit higher. It's not that bad, but I went ahead and put it in the cons list. New Hampshire is not typically thought of as being a great state for taxes for retirees, but it has a number of pros: no tax on Social Security, no tax on traditional pensions, no state income tax, no state sales tax, which is unusual. And then the cons are dividends and interest payments are taxed. Now that is going to be phased out in, I believe it's 2023. Let me check out. I don't have it there, but I think it's phasing out in 2023. So there will in the future be no income tax on dividends and interest payments. And the big negative for New Hampshire is it just has a really high property tax. And like I said, property tax is going to hit you hard because your income's not increasing, but if the value of your home increases, then your property tax could increase. Next, South Dakota. Now, South Dakota, not really that popular with retirees, well, because it is frigid all winter long. But if you're just interested in saving taxes, there are a few benefits, a few things to like about South Dakota. There's no tax on Social Security. There's no tax on traditional pension, no state income tax. So that means your retirement distributions wouldn't be taxed. Low state sales tax, 4.5%. The con, and honestly, this isn't that high of a property tax, but I needed something negative besides the weather. So I put it under the con column. The property tax is around $2,200 on average. Let's go back. Next state up is Tennessee, home to Nashville and Memphis. You're seeing more retirees move to Memphis or to Tennessee in general. Nashville is really hot right now, partially because there's no tax on Social Security, no tax on traditional pensions, no state income tax, low property tax. And this is interesting for a state that's as popular right now as Tennessee is, really low property tax. Now, here are the cons. They tax dividend and interest payments. Over 65, you may actually be able to avoid that. There are a few caveats that you can look at. And then the other con is high sales tax, and food is taxed. Don't understand why states tax food. Texas, no state or no, honestly, you just say with Texas, there's no income tax. There's no, which means you're not going to get taxed on your pension or Social Security. The cons in Texas, middle of the road state sales tax, 6.25%. And Texas has very high property tax. Now, the benefit to Texas is there is a cap to how much individual property tax can be raised each year. So that helps you a little bit, but it still can go up fairly significantly. This is becoming an increasing problem as Texas becomes more popular, as housing values increase. It's just becoming more expensive to own your home there. Washington State has a number of benefits and quite a few cons, but there's no tax on Social Security, there's no state income tax, and there's also no tax on traditional pensions, no tax on retirement distributions. The cons is the state sales tax, 6.5%. There is a property tax on average is $3,600. There is a new, this actually a tax, a 7% tax on long-term capital gains, which could really impact retirees if you're taking money out of your taxable account. This 7% tax on capital gains is right now tied up in court. So we aren't sure whether that's going to last or not, but it could be something you have to think about. And then also there's an estate tax. So if you have an estate above $2.2 million, which isn't a massive size estate, your family or your heirs could have to deal with estate tax. Say that a couple times fast. So these are the top 10 states, or I guess top 11 states that are the most tax efficient. I hope this was helpful. If you enjoyed this channel, if you would share this with your friends and your family, ask any comments below if you have any questions, follow-up questions about any of these states, or if you think I got something wrong, you're like, I work in the tax office in Tennessee, you don't know what you're talking about, leave a comment below, and please like this, subscribe, ding that bell. All that helps the YouTube algorithms know that this is content worth watching. Until next time, this is Retirement Made Simple.